Hi class, we are in Unit 2. This is Part 2, Biomolecules. And today we're going to talk about carbohydrates, give you all of the notes you need to know about the molecular structure and the function of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, do you love them or do you hate them? Probably if you've been on a diet and tried to lose weight, you really hate carbohydrates and you may try to go on a carb-free diet. But if you're an athlete, your coach might ask you to carb load and eat a meal full of carbohydrates right before a match or a meet so that you have quick energy to burn during your athletic event. So it can go either way. We're going to learn a lot about carbohydrates though today. In the Pear Deck slides before this, you saw a picture that looked like this, and you were asked to study that picture and answer a few questions. So let's go over the questions. So what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are produced by plants during the process of photosynthesis. When we say that autotrophs make their own food, we're talking about the fact that autotrophs or plants make carbohydrates, and that is their source of energy. Number 2, after eating plant foods, humans convert the carbohydrates into the form of a carbohydrate called glucose. It's the simplest form of carbohydrate. Number 3, name the reaction that occurs in boxes A, C, and D on that first slide. So what's going on there, you probably noticed that it was the process of digestion and the reaction that occurs to break down large macromolecules into smaller monomers. That's called hydrolysis. Okay, we're on page 12 in your notes packet, so if you want to turn there, please pause this video at any time if you need more time to write down the notes. We're going to start out with the functions of carbohydrate, and there are 3 main functions that you need to know about. First of all, carbohydrates can be used for energy storage. The energy is actually stored in the carbon-to-carbon bonds. These are covalent bonds that you remember from our chemistry part of the unit. And in the bonds, there is energy that's stored. So when those bonds are broken, the body can get quick energy, the organism can get quick energy, a quick energy release, and it's short-term storage of energy. Another function of carbohydrates would be for structure. Carbohydrates make up cell wall in plants and fungi, some protists, and bacteria. So they're strong and structural for supporting the cell wall. Another function of carbohydrates would be for cell identification. Carbohydrates can be located in the cell membrane and play a part in cell-to-cell recognition. All right, next part of our notes on page 12. The elements that you find in carbohydrates: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Only those 3 elements. So it's really easy to remember the mnemonic CHO for carbohydrates. Monosaccharides are made up of just 1 sugar, and they will always have a ratio of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom for every carbon atom. So it's written as CHO, and then it would be a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Glucose is C6H12O6. If you reduce that, you end up with 1 to 2 to 1. All right, so the first kind of carbohydrates that we'll talk about would be monomers. These are the simple sugars. Monosaccharide, that word saccharide means sugar. So it's a single or simple sugar. They all have the formula of C6H12O6 in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio of carbon to hydrogen to oxygen. Another important fact is that these monomers all have the functional group hydroxyl. So they all have hydroxyl groups. In your drawing on page 12, you have an example of fructose, glucose, and galactose. Pause the video and circle all of the hydroxyl groups you see in each of those monomers. Okay, here's the answer. Did you find 5 hydroxyl groups in each of the monosaccharides? If you didn't, take a look again and see if you can see them. Quick review. Glucose, galactose, and fructose all have the same molecular formula, but different structural formulas. What would we call these? Did you say isomers? If you did, good job, you're correct. Here's a little bit of information about glucose. Please don't write this down, but just listen and pay attention. Glucose is the most abundant monosaccharide found in the body. It is the preferred and also the main source of energy for the brain and the red blood cells. Glucose is part of every single disaccharide that there is. So now let's talk about what a disaccharide is. Monosaccharides are going to link together, or monomers, to form polymers. In this case, we're going to stop at just two and call it a dimer or a disaccharide. What reaction would this be for monomers to form together to form disaccharides? A water is released. What reaction? Did you tell yourself that this is dehydration synthesis, also known as condensation reaction? If you did, good job, you're correct. All right, disaccharides. These are formed from the bonding of two sugar monomers. There are 3 disaccharides that you need to memorize. The first one is maltose. It's the least common, and it's formed from the digestion of starches. Maltose is made of glucose and glucose bonded together. Sucrose is the most common disaccharide. You might know it as table sugar. Think about that the next time you put sugar on something, or in a coffee, you're putting sucrose in there, and what you're putting is a bond of glucose plus fructose. Sucrose is glucose plus fructose. Lactose, known as milk sugar, is a disaccharide, and it's composed of glucose plus galactose. Okay, so carbohydrates can also come in the form of polysaccharides. A polysaccharide is 3 or more glucose monomers bonded together. Polysaccharides can be divided into energy storage or structural polysaccharides. So we'll start with the energy storage polysaccharides, and that would be starch and glycogen. Starch is the energy storage form of carbohydrate in plants. Starch is easily hydrolyzed to glucose monomers, and it has the structure of a helix. Think of DNA, which is in a helix structure, or think of a slinky, which is a helical structure. Glycogen is the energy storage form of carbohydrate in animals. Glycogen can be found in muscle and liver cells. Its structure is highly branched glucose chains. So let's take a look just a minute at glycogen and starch. I can get my pointer here. Yes. Okay, so glycogen, the energy storage form of carbohydrate in animals, it is a highly branched structure. So what this means, each of these red beads or dots is a glucose. So it's very easy for enzymes to get in there and pop off a glucose, like popping apart pop beads. And every time that a bond is broken, energy is released. So really quick energy. It's a storage form of carbohydrate in animals. And then if you take a look at starch, starch is in a helical form. And if you can picture a slinky, you can squeeze and tighten up a slinky into a very small, compact structure. And that's what starch can do. So you can have a lot of glucose, a very, very long starch molecule, but not taking up a lot of space. So for example, in a potato, which is mostly starch from the potato plant, you can have a lot of starch in there because of its compact structure. So the structure of these things really helps them do their job or their function. Okay, carbohydrates for structure. We have 2 of those. The first is cellulose. Cellulose is used for structure in plant cell walls, and we also mentioned some fungi and some bacteria. Cellulose is lines and lines and lines of linked glucose, so each green would be a glucose, and then those are cross-linked as well, so it's very structurally strong. Chitin is another structural carbohydrate, and it's found mostly in fungi, cell walls, and it can be used as an exoskeleton in arthropods like crabs or insects or spiders because it's so structurally strong. All right, we have to talk about how all of these glucose are linked together, and they're linked together with something called a glycosidic linkage, or also called a glycosidic bond. This is a covalent bond that links one sugar monomer to the next. So this is how disaccharides and polysaccharides are made. The reaction to form this bond is called dehydration synthesis. You already knew that. The bond is called a glycosidic bond, but it's covalent, and that's the type of bond that it is. What are the products of each dehydration synthesis reaction? One more monomer is added to the chain, and one water molecule is produced for each glycosidic bond that is created. You can take a look at the diagram. I don't know if you can see at the bottom, but we have glucose plus glucose produces the disaccharide maltose. Okay, dehydration synthesis reaction does this. The bond that's formed is a glycosidic linkage. So this is the end of the page 12 carbohydrate notes. Your job now is to go on to the next slide in the Pear Deck and take the learning check that's there waiting for you. Also, remember to read the carbohydrate reading that we have for you on Schoology. It's from CK12, and it'll give you extra information if you need some more review on carbohydrates or any of the macromolecules. Thanks for listening.